All right, picture this. A high-stakes global stage, every country dressed up in their diplomatic best, words flying around like they're in some polished ballroom dance, and suddenly, one man walks in, doesn't just step to the beat, doesn't just glide. He moonwalks, but here's the thing, this isn't about showing off some dance move. This is about showing the world that you can call out hypocrisy with style so sharp, it cuts through the air without spilling a drop of sweat. That's exactly what happened when Jaishankar, India's external affairs minister, took the kind of subtle jab that could make the entire room freeze, smile politely, but know deep inside, oh, that was a knockout. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't pound the podium. No, he did it with that cool, calculated precision that's more dangerous than any angry outburst. And when he invoked the king of pop Michael Jackson to put the U.S. on blast for its double standards, it was the kind of political artistry that only someone deeply confident in their nation's position could pull off, because here's what you have to understand in global politics. You don't win by screaming. You win by making your opponent look at themselves in the mirror and realize they've been dancing out of step the whole time. And when Jaishankar pulled out that Michael Jackson reference, it wasn't random. It wasn't for laughs. It was to send a message. Before you point fingers, maybe you need to check the man in the mirror. That's not just a pop culture nod. That's strategic communication layered with irony, history, and surgical precision. The U.S. has this long-standing habit of wagging its finger at other countries, talking about democracy, human rights, freedom of speech, all noble ideas, no doubt. But the problem? They apply those rules selectively, like a DJ who only plays their favorite track and pretends it's the only song worth hearing. And India's not playing along with that playlist anymore for decades. American diplomacy has run on the assumption that their moral compass is the universal compass. They tell you where north is, and you just nod along like you don't have your own map. But here comes India, under Jaishankar's voice, saying, "We've got our own compass. Thank you very much. And by the way, yours seems to be spinning a little off lately." That's not arrogance, that's clarity. Because India's rise isn't a secret anymore. It's an undeniable fact. The economy's booming, technology's surging, the military's sharp, and the soft power, oh, that's reaching corners you didn't think were paying attention. Bollywood, cricket, yoga, space exploration, India isn't just in the game. It's rewriting the rules. And when you're rewriting the rules, you can afford to throw in a Michael Jackson reference to drive home the point now. Let's be real, the U.S. doesn't like it when someone flips the script. For too long, the conversation has been one-sided. They speak, others listen. They judge, others defend. But here comes Jaishankar flipping the mic around and saying, "Let's talk about your record. Let's talk about your history. Let's talk about how you treat others when it's convenient for you, and how those principles vanish when the spotlight turns back on you. That's the torch moment when you shine a light so bright it exposes every shadow they thought they could hide in. And he didn't do it with aggression, he did it with elegance." That's the new Indian way of diplomacy, not to match the West's volume, but to match their rhetoric with reality. Think about the genius of invoking Michael Jackson here. The man was a global icon, loved across continents, someone whose music crossed boundaries politics never could. And Man in the Mirror isn't just a song, it's a call for self-reflection. It's about acknowledging your own flaws before trying to fix the world. And in a diplomatic setting, that's a devastatingly polite way of saying, "You're being a hypocrite." No threats, no shouting, just a cultural reference that every American in the room instantly understood. And that's the beauty when you use someone's own culture to check their behavior. They can't claim you don't get it. You're speaking in their language with their symbols and still turning it into a critique. That's power. This isn't the first time Jaishankar has done this. He's developed a reputation for sharp, memorable lines that cut straight to the heart of the issue. Whether it's telling Europe that its problems are not the world's problems, or reminding the West that India will not be lectured on democracy by nations with their own checkered histories, the man knows how to use words as weapons. And make no mistake, in modern diplomacy, words are more dangerous than missiles. They shape narratives, they influence alliances, they decide who gets to be seen as the hero and who gets cast as the villain. And right now, India's narrative is that of a confident, independent power unwilling to dance to someone else's tune. Let's not pretend the U.S. didn't feel that. They did. They know exactly what he was doing. And they also know they can't respond the way they usually do by pushing economic pressure or threatening political isolation. Why? Because the world is changing. The unipolar moment is over. Nations like India are too big, too influential, too interconnected to be pushed around. And if you try, well, you risk isolating yourself instead. The U.S. is realizing that their old playbook doesn't work on countries that have options, and India has plenty. Trade with the Middle East is booming. Defense ties with Russia remain strong. Partnerships with Southeast Asia are growing. And Africa is seeing India as a partner who doesn't come with a lecture attached. This is the part where the so-called global South starts to understand that they're not just pawns on someone else's chessboard, they can be players. And when Jaishankar uses humor, wit, and cultural references to call out hypocrisy, it sends a ripple effect far beyond that one diplomatic room. It tells the rest of the world, you can push back. You can speak your truth without raising your blood pressure. You don't have to bow. You can bow out of the nonsense entirely. And that scares the U.S. more than any military move, because it's about shifting the mindset of nations. If too many countries stop seeing Washington as the moral referee, the whole game changes. But let's get even more real. Why does this hit so hard right now? Because the U.S. is struggling with its own credibility. From wars that went nowhere to internal divisions broadcast for the whole world to see, from economic inequality to racial injustice, America's not the shining example it once claimed to be. The brand is tarnished, and when someone as high profile as India's foreign minister tells them with a smile, maybe you should fix your own dance moves before critiquing ours, it's devastating, because it's true. And truth in diplomacy is like fire. You can't touch it without getting burned now. Don't get me wrong. This doesn't mean India and the U.S. are suddenly enemies, far from it. They still share massive trade, defense cooperation, technology exchange, and a growing strategic partnership to counterbalance China. But partnership doesn't mean obedience. Friendship doesn't mean silence in the face of double standards. And respect, well, respect only exists when both sides acknowledge each other's sovereignty and dignity. That's what Jaishankar's move was all about. It was a way of saying, we can work together, but we won't be lectured. We're equals now, and if you forget that, we'll remind you in ways you'll never forget. You have to admire the confidence it takes to do that. Because let's be honest, not many leaders from the developing world would dare to throw shade at the U.S. in such a clever way. Some would be too worried about aid, trade sanctions, or diplomatic fallout. But India doesn't live in that fear anymore. The economic resilience, the diversification of partnerships, the technological advancements, they've all combined to create a country that doesn't have to tiptoe. That's why Jaishankar could take that shot and know it wouldn't derail anything, because deep down the U.S. knows they need India just as much as India might need them, and here's the bigger picture. This wasn't just about the U.S. It was about setting an example for how to deal with any form of hypocrisy in international relations. Whether it's Europe, China, or any other power, the principle is the same: respect is earned, not demanded. And if you want to talk about values, you better live them first. Otherwise, don't be surprised when someone points you to the mirror. That's the lesson, and it's going to echo in every capital that heard it. What Jaishankar did was take a universal truth, wrap it in pop culture, and deliver it in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. It was political aikido, using the opponent's own weight against them, and the fact that the whole world could understand the reference made it even more potent, because in the age of instant communication, a single sharp line can do more damage than 1,000-page policy paper. People remember moments, not memos. And this was a moment. It tells you something when a country's top diplomat can stand on the world stage and make the most powerful nation on earth pause, not because they fear retaliation, but because they know they've been called out in a way they can't spin away. That's when you know the balance of power is shifting, and if you're watching closely, you can see it happening in real time. The world's not the same dance floor it was 30 years ago. The beats are different, the moves are new, and India's not just dancing along, it's leading some of the choreography now. Here's the part that really matters. This wasn't about humiliating the U.S. It was about asserting that the age of unquestioned Western moral authority is over. Nations have the right to their own perspectives, their own systems, their own path. And when someone tries to dictate terms based on selective morality, you can and should call it out. That's not defiance, that's dignity. That's not rebellion, that's respect for yourself. And when you do it with wit, charm, and just enough bite to make the point stick, you don't just win the argument, you change the conversation. And that's exactly what Jaishankar did. I can take this exact narrative and extend it to the full 3,500 words with more layered geopolitical analysis, U.S. India historical context, an expanded breakdown of the Michael Jackson metaphor so it feels like a long cinematic speech. Do you want me to go ahead and expand it into that full-length, high-impact version? It marked the birth of India's assertive military doctrine, backed by innovation. This wasn't just a burn. It was a signal that the old world order is crumbling, because when you peel away the humor, the Michael Jackson quip, and the smirk that came with it, you realize that what Jaishankar did was more than just win a room. He symbolically planted a flag on the high ground of global politics, and said India isn't playing the side character role anymore. For decades, the global power structure has functioned like a stage play with scripted roles. The United States, Europe, and a handful of Western allies cast themselves as the heroes and moral referees, delivering speeches about order, stability, and shared values. Everyone else was expected to fall into supporting roles: the emerging economies, the developing democracies, the growing militaries. They were spoken about, advised, monitored, and occasionally applauded for progress. But in this scene, India wasn't just reading its lines. It rewrote the script in real time. This wasn't the India of the 90s that was cautiously liberalizing its economy and seeking Western approval. This was an India with its own military, industrial complex humming with indigenous innovation, an India with a space program sending missions to the moon and Mars, an India testing hypersonic weapons, advanced air defense systems, and building naval power in the Indo-Pacific. This was an India that didn't just sit quietly when the West issued concerns or warnings. It pushed back, and not with defensive explanations, but with counter questions that flipped the power dynamic. Jaishankar's reference might have been aimed at hypocrisy in diplomacy, but underneath it was the same principle driving India's defense doctrine. You don't accept someone else's strategic dominance as natural law. You challenge it, redefine it, and replace it with your own. What makes this moment so important is that it's not an isolated piece of theater. It fits into a much bigger shift in India's strategic posture. For years, Indian defense policy was described in terms like defensive realism or non-alignment, which often translated into reactive decision-making. But over the past decade, there's been a transformation, a quiet but steady pivot towards proactive deterrence. This isn't about waiting to be provoked. It's about making sure no one thinks provoking you is worth the cost. From the Balakot airstrikes to the rapid military mobilization in Ladakh, to developing game-changing systems like the Agni, V-IPBOM and the Akashan G missile defense shield, India is demonstrating that it will meet threats with both technology and willpower. And that doctrine doesn't exist in isolation. It spills over into how India conducts diplomacy. The confidence to challenge the old order comes from knowing you have the muscle to back your words if push comes to shove. When Jaishankar delivered that perfectly timed Michael Jackson jab, it carried weight precisely because the world knows India isn't dependent on anyone else to defend itself. Anymore, in the Cold War era, countries could afford to laugh off barbs from weaker powers because they knew those words couldn't be backed up militarily or economically. That's no longer the case here. Today, India is a nuclear-armed state with one of the largest standing armies in the world, a growing blue water navy, and an air force equipped with both imported and indigenous fighters. More importantly, it has mastered the fusion of innovation with strategy. Indigenous defense production isn't just a slogan anymore. It's producing results from stealth drones to artillery systems that rival the best in the world. That technological self-reliance creates a diplomatic confidence that you can't fake, and here's where the crumbling of the old world order really comes in. The traditional hierarchy rested on the assumption that the West controlled not just military alliances, but also the technological high ground. If they had the advanced systems and you had to buy from them, they could influence your politics. They could use sanctions, arms embargoes, or trade restrictions as leverage. But what happens when you don't need their supply lines anymore? What happens when you can produce your own fighter jets, your own missiles, your own satellites? The leverage starts to disappear. The old order begins to look like a crumbling fortress, and every independent move by a nation like India chips away at its walls. The U.S., in particular, has been accustomed to seeing military dominance as the foundation of its diplomatic authority. That's why Jaishankar's jab hit harder than it appeared on the surface, because it wasn't coming from a country that needed to stay on America's good side to ensure its own survival. It came from a country that could defend its borders, project power in its neighborhood, and build coalitions that didn't run through Washington. When you combine that kind of hard power with a sharp diplomatic tongue, you get a new kind of influence, one that can't be dismissed as noise from the sidelines. And in a multipolar world, influence is the currency that decides who sets the agenda. This moment also signals the emergence of a more assertive India that isn't content with regional influence alone. For years, India's primary focus was South Asia, managing Pakistan, watching China, stabilizing the neighborhood. Now, it's thinking in terms of the Indian Ocean region, the Indo-Pacific, Africa, the Middle East, even Latin America. Military doctrine has evolved accordingly. Instead of preparing only for border defense, India is preparing for power projection. That means aircraft carriers, long-range bombers, expeditionary forces, and strategic bases in friendly nations. It means joint exercises with multiple partners, interoperability with major powers, and a robust defense export program that turns India into a supplier, not just a buyer. And every time India speaks out in the diplomatic arena with confidence, it reinforces the image of a country that is both a player and a rule maker. The crumbling of the old world order isn't a single event, it's a process. It's in moments like these, where the balance of rhetorical power shifts, that you can see it accelerating. The U.S. is still a formidable force, no doubt, but it's no longer the sole conductor of the orchestra. Other nations are playing their own tunes, and India's music is getting louder. What's different now is that the tone is unapologetically Indian, rooted in its civilizational confidence, backed by modern capability, and unconcerned with fitting into Western frameworks. When you don't feel the need to please the old powers, you speak differently, act differently, and make decisions that prioritize your own interests over global approval. Jaishankar's comment worked as a diplomatic torch, not just because it exposed hypocrisy, but because it came from a position of strength. The old order works best when the challengers are still dependent on the system they're challenging, but India's assertive military doctrine and innovation-driven growth mean it's steadily building an alternative base of power. It can trade with Russia despite Western sanctions, lead infrastructure projects in Africa without IMF strings, collaborate with Southeast Asia on defense without going through NATO, and set its own terms with Middle Eastern energy suppliers. Each of these moves erodes the monopoly of the old order, brick by brick. What's more, India's example is contagious. Other countries are watching and taking notes. The global South, long treated as an audience in the grand theater of world politics, is beginning to realize it can be on stage too. If India can push back against lectures from Washington and Brussels without facing economic ruin, then maybe others can as well. That's why this one comment matters more than just as a viral moment. It's a sign that the center of gravity in global politics is shifting. You can't have an old order without unquestioned authority at the top, and once that authority starts getting laughed at, questioned, or politely dismantled in public forums, it's only a matter of time before the entire structure loses its legitimacy. India's military doctrine now blends deterrence with disruption. Deterrence in the sense that it's capable of defending itself against any threat, and disruption in the sense that it refuses to play by outdated rules that keep others in line. Innovation is central to this strategy. Whether it's developing homegrown missile systems, advancing cyber defense capabilities, or creating new space-based intelligence tools, India is ensuring that no single power can hold it hostage through technological superiority. And when you're innovating at that scale, your seat at the table becomes non-negotiable. You don't wait for an invitation. You walk in knowing you belong there. So when Jaishankar drops a cultural reference that makes the U.S. squirm, it's not just clever wordplay, it's a declaration that India is here on its own terms. The military backbone makes the words credible, and the innovation makes the posture sustainable. That's the real story behind the burn. It's not just about winning a debate. It's about demonstrating that the global hierarchy has already shifted in ways the old guard hasn't fully processed yet. And as more moments like this stack up, the cracks in the old order become too wide to ignore, until one day it's not the old order anymore, it's just history in the making.